Space Viking by H.BeamPiper. Chapter 1. They stood together at the parapet, their arms about each other's waists, her head against his cheek. Behind, the broad-leaved shrubbery gossiped softly with the wind, and from the lower main terrace came music and laughing voices. The city of Wardshaven spread in front of them, white buildings rising from the wide spaces of green treetops under a shimmer of sun-reflecting aircars above. Far away, the mountains were violet in the afternoon haze, and the huge red sun hung in a sky as yellow as a ripe peach. His eye caught a twinkle 10 miles to the southwest, and for an instant he was puzzled. Then he frowned. The sunlight on the 2,000-foot globe of Duke Angus' new ship, the Enterprise, back at the Gorham shipyards after her final trial cruise. He didn't want to think about that now. Instead, he pressed the girl closer and whispered her name, Elaine. And then, caressing every syllable, Lady Elaine Trask of Traskin. Oh, no, Lucas. Her protest was half joking and half apprehensive. It's bad luck to be called by your married name before the wedding. I've been calling you that in my mind since the night of the Duke's ball, when you were just home from school on Excalibur. She looked up from the corner of her eye. That was when I started calling me that, too, she confessed. There's a terrace to the west of Traskin New House, he told her. Tomorrow we'll have our dinner there and watch the sunset together. I know. I thought that was to be our sunset watching place. You have been peeking, he accused. Traskin New House was to be your surprise. I always was a present peeker. New Year's and my birthdays, but I only saw it from the air. I'll be very surprised at everything inside, she promised, and very delighted. And when she'd seen everything and Traskin New House wasn't a surprise anymore, they'd take a long space trip. He hadn't mentioned that to her yet. To some of the other sword worlds, Excalibur, of course, and Morglay, and Flamberge, and Durendal. No, not Durendal. The war had started there again, but they'd have so much fun. And she would see clear blue skies again and stars at night. The cloud veil hid the stars from Graham, and Elaine had missed them since coming home from Excalibur. The shadow of an aircar fell briefly upon them, and they looked up and turned their heads in time to see it sink with graceful dignity toward the landing stage of Carvel House, and he glimpsed its blazonry, sword and atom symbol, the badge of the ducal house of Ward. He wondered if it were just Duke Angus himself, or some of his people come ahead of him. They should get back to their guests, he supposed. Then he took her in his arms and kissed her, and she responded ardently. It must have been all of 5 minutes since they'd done that before. A slight cough behind them brought them apart and their heads around. It was Caesar Carvel, gray-haired and portly, the breast of his blue coat gleaming with orders and decorations, and the sapphire in the pommel of his dress dagger twinkling. I thought I'd find you two here, Elaine's father smiled. You'll have tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow together, but need I remind you that today we have guests, and more coming every minute. Who came in that Ward car? Elaine asked. Rovard Grafus and Otto Harkonnen. You never met him, did you, Lucas? No, not by introduction. I'd like to before he spaces out. He had nothing against Harkonnen personally, only against what he represented. Is the Duke coming? Oh, surely. Lionel of New Haven and the Lord of Newport are coming with him. They're at the palace now. Carval hesitated. His nephew's back in town. Elaine was distressed. She started to say, Oh, dear, I hope he doesn't. Has Dunnan been bothering Elaine again? Nothing to take notice of. He was here yesterday demanding to speak with her. We got him to leave without too much unpleasantness. It'll be something for me to take notice of if he keeps it up after tomorrow. For his seconds and Andre Dunnan's, that was, He hoped it wouldn't come to that. He didn't want to have to shoot a kinsman to the house of Ward, and a crazy man to boot. "I'm terribly sorry for him," Elaine was saying. "Father, you should have let me talk to him. I might have made him understand." Caesar Carval was shocked. "Child, you couldn't have subjected yourself to that. The man is insane." Then he saw her bare shoulders and was even more shocked. "Elaine, your shawl." Her hands went up and couldn't find it. She looked about in confused embarrassment. Amused, Lucas picked it up from the shrub onto which she had tossed it and draped it over her shoulders, his hands lingering briefly. Then he gestured to the older man to precede them, and they entered the arbored walk. At the other end, in an open circle, a fountain played. White marble, girls and boys bathing in the jade-green basin. Another piece of loot from one of the old Federation planets. That was something he'd tried to avoid in furnishing Trask a new house. There'd be a lot of that coming to Graham after Otto Harkonnen took the Enterprise to space. "I'll have to come back sometime and visit them," Elaine whispered to him. "They'll miss me." "You'll find a lot of new friends at your new home," he whispered back. "You wait till tomorrow." "I'm going to put a word in the Duke's ear about that fellow," Caesar Carval, still thinking of Dunnan, was saying. "If he speaks to him, maybe it'll do some good." "I doubt it. I don't think Duke Angus has any influence over him at all." Dunnan's mother had been the Duke's younger sister. From his father he had inherited what had originally been a prosperous barony. Now it was mortgaged to the top of the manor house aerial mast. The Duke had once assumed Dunnan's debts and refused to do so again. Dunnan had gone to space a few times as a junior officer on trade and raid voyages into the old Federation. He was supposed to be a fair astrogator. He had expected his uncle to give him command of the Enterprise, which had been ridiculous. Disappointed in that, he had recruited a mercenary company and was seeking military employment. It was suspected that he was in correspondence with his uncle's worst enemy, Duke Humphrey of Glaspeth. And he was obsessively in love with Elaine Carval, a passion which seemed to nourish itself on its own hopelessness. Maybe it would be a good idea to take that space trip right away. There ought to be a ship leaving Biglersport for one of the other sword worlds before long. They paused at the head of the escalators. The garden below was thronged with guests, the bright shawls of the ladies and the coats of the men making shifting color patterns among the flower beds and on the lawns and under the trees. Serving robots, flame yellow and black in the Carval colors, floated about playing soft music and offering refreshments. There was a continuous spiral of changing costume color around the circular robo-table. Voices babbled happily like a mountain river. And as they stood looking down, another aircar circled low, green and gold, lettered Pan-Planet News Service. Caesar Carval swore in irritation. "Didn't there used to be something they called privacy?" he asked. "It's a big story, Caesar." It was. More than the marriage of two people who happened to be in love with each other. It was the marriage of the farming and ranching barony of Traskin and the Carval steel mills. More, it was public announcement that the wealth and fighting men of both baronies were now aligned behind Duke Angus of Wardshaven. So it was a general holiday. Every industry had closed down at noon today and would be closed until morning after next, and there would be dancing in every park and feasting in every tavern. To sword-worlders, any excuse for a holiday was better than none. "There are people, Caesar. They have a right to have a good time with us. I know everybody at Traskin is watching this by screen." He raised his hand and waved to the news car, and when it swung its pickup around, he waved again. Then they went down the long escalator. Lady Lavina Carval was the center of a cluster of matrons and dowagers, around which tomorrow's bridesmaids fluttered like many-colored butterflies. She took possession of her daughter and dragged her into the feminine circle. He saw Rovard Grofus, small and saturnine, Duke Angus' henchman, and Bert Sanderson, Lady Lavina's brother. They spoke, and then an upper servant, his tabard blazoned with the yellow flame and black hammer of Carval Mills, approached his master with some tale of domestic crisis, and the two went away together. You haven't met Captain Harkiman, Lucas, Rovard Groffus said. I wish you'd come over and say hello and have a drink with him. I know your attitude, but he's a good sort. Personally, I wish we had a few like him around here. That was his main objection. There were fewer and fewer men of that sort on any of the Sword Worlds. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. A dozen men clustered around the bartending robot, his cousin and family lawyer, Nikolai Trask, Lothar Fail, the banker, Alex Gorham, the shipbuilder, and his son Basil, Baron Rathmore, more of the Wardshaven nobles whom he knew only distantly, and Otto Harkiman. Harkiman was a space Viking. That would have set him apart even if he hadn't topped the tallest of them by a head. He wore a short black jacket, heavily gold-braided, and black trousers inside ankle boots. The dagger on his belt was no mere dress ornament. His tousled red-brown hair was long enough to furnish extra padding in a combat helmet, and his beard was cut square at the bottom. He had been fighting on Durendal for one of the branches of the royal house contesting fratricidally for the throne. The wrong one. He had lost his ship, and most of his men, and almost his own life. He had been a penniless refugee on Flamberge, owning only the clothes he stood in and his personal weapons and the loyalty of half a dozen adventurers, as penniless as himself, when Duke Angus had invited him to Graham to command the enterprise. "A pleasure, Lord Trask. I've met your lovely bride-to-be, and now that I meet you, let me congratulate both." Then, as they were having a drink together, he put his foot in it by asking, "You're not an investor in the Tanith adventure, are you?" He said he wasn't, and would have let it go at that. Young Basil Gorham had to get his foot in, too. "Lord Trask does not approve of the Tanith adventure," he said scornfully. "He thinks we should stay home and produce wealth, instead of exporting robbery and murder to the old Federation for it." The smile remained on Otto Harkiman's face, only the friendliness was gone. He unobtrusively shifted his drink to his left hand. "Well, our operations are definable as robbery and murder," he agreed. "Space Vikings are professional robbers and murderers. And you object? Perhaps you find me personally objectionable?" "I wouldn't have shaken your hand or had a drink with you if I did. I don't care how many planets you raid or cities you sack, or how many innocents, if that's what they are, you massacre in the old Federation. You couldn't possibly do anything worse than those people have been doing to one another for the past 10 centuries. What I object to is the way you're raiding the Sword Worlds." "You're crazy," Basil Gorham exploded. "Young man," Harkiman reproved, "the conversation was between Lord Trask and myself. And when somebody makes a statement you don't understand, don't tell him he's crazy. Ask him what he means. What do you mean, Lord Trask?" "You should know. You've just raided Graham for 800 of our best men. You raided me for close to 40 vaqueros, farm workers, lumbermen, machine operators, and I doubt I'll be able to replace them with as good." He turned to the elder Gorham. "Alex, how many have you lost to Captain Harkiman?" Gorham tried to make it a dozen. Pressed, he admitted to a score and a half. Roboticians, machine supervisors, programmers, a couple of engineers, a foreman. There was grudging agreement from the others. Bert Sanderson's engine works had lost almost as many of the same kind. Even Lothar Fail admitted losing a computer man and a guard sergeant. And after they were gone, the farms and ranches and factories would go on, almost, but not quite, as before. Nothing on Graham. Nothing on any of the Sword Worlds was done as efficiently as 3 centuries ago. The whole level of Sword World life was sinking, like the east coastline of this continent, so slowly as to be evident only from the records and monuments of the past. He said as much, and added, "And the genetic loss. The best Sword World genes are literally escaping to space, like the atmosphere of a low-gravity planet, each generation begotten by fathers slightly inferior to the last. It wasn't so bad when the Space Vikings raided directly from the Sword Worlds. They got home once in a while. Now they're conquering planets of the old Federation for bases, and staying there." Everybody had begun to relax. This wouldn't be a quarrel. Harkonnen, who had shifted his drink back to his right hand, chuckled. That's right. I've fathered my share of brats in the Old Federation, and I know space Vikings whose fathers were born on Old Federation planets. He turned to Basil Gorham. You see, the gentleman isn't crazy at all. That's what happened to the Terran Federation, by the way. The good men all left to colonize, and the stuffed shirts and yes-men and herd followers and safety-firsters stayed on Terra and tried to govern the galaxy. Well, maybe this is all new to you, Captain, Rovard Grauffus said sourly, but Lucas Trask's dirge for the decline and fall of the Sword Worlds is an old song to the rest of us. I have too much to do to stay here and argue. Lothar Fail evidently did intend to stay and argue. All you're saying, Lucas, is that we're expanding. You want us to sit here and build up population pressure like Terra in the 1st century? With 3.5 billion people spread out on 12 planets? I had that many on Terra alone, and it took us 8 centuries to reach that. That had been since the 9th century atomic era at the end of the Big War. 10,000 men and women on Abagor, refusing to surrender, had taken the remnant of the System States Alliance Navy to space, seeking a world the Federation had never heard of and wouldn't find for a long time. That had been the world they had called Excalibur. From it, their grandchildren had colonized Joyeuse and Durendal and Flamberge. Halteclear had been colonized in the next generation from Joyeuse, and Graham from Halteclear. We're not expanding, Lothar. We're contracting. We stopped expanding 350 years ago when that ship came back to Morglay from the Old Federation and reported what had been happening out there since the Big War. Before that, we were discovering new planets and colonizing them. Since then, we've been picking the bones of the dead Terran Federation. Something was going on by the escalators to the landing stage. People were moving excitedly in that direction, and the news cars were circling like vultures over a sick cow. Harkonnen wondered hopefully if it mightn't be a fight. Some drunk being bounced, Nicolay, Lucas' cousin, commented. Caesar's let all Wardshaven in here today. But Lucas, this Janeth adventure, we're not making any hit-and-run raid. We're taking over a whole planet. It'll be another sword world in 40 or 50 years. Inside another century, we'll conquer the whole Federation, Baron Rathmore declared. He was a politician and never let exaggeration worry him. What I don't understand, Harkonnen said, is why you support Duke Angus, Lord Trask, if you think the Tanith adventure is doing Graham so much harm. If Angus didn't do it, somebody else would. But Angus is going to make himself king of Graham, and I don't think anybody else could do that. This planet needs a single sovereignty. I don't know how much you've seen of it outside this duchy, but don't take Wardshaven as typical. Some of these duchies, like Glaspith or Didriksburg, are literal snake pits. All the major barons are at each other's throats, and they can't even keep their own knights and petty barons in order. Why, there's a miserable little war down on the South Main continent. It's been going on for over 2 centuries. That's probably where Dunnan's going to take that army of his, a robot manufacturing baron said. I hope it gets wiped out, and Dunnan with it. You don't have to go to South Main, just go to Glaspith, somebody else said. Well, if we don't get a planetary monarchy to keep order, this planet will decivilize like anything in the Old Federation. Oh, come on, Lucas, Alex Gorham protested. That's pulling it out too far. Yes, for one thing, we don't have the Neo-Barbarians, somebody said. And if they ever came out here, we'd blow them to MC square, nothing flat. Might be a good thing if they did, too. It would stop us squabbling among ourselves. Harkonnen looked at him in surprise. Just who do you think the Neo-Barbarians are, anyhow? He asked. Some race of invading nomads? Attila's Huns and spaceships? Well, isn't that who they are? Gorham asked. Niflheim, no. There aren't 12.5 planets in the Old Federation that still have hyperdrive, and they're all civilized. That's if civilized is what Gilgamesh is, he added. These are homemade barbarians, workers and peasants who revolted to seize and divide the wealth, and then found they'd smashed the means of production and killed off all the technical brains. Survivors on planets hit during the interstellar wars from the 11th to the 13th centuries, who lost the machinery of civilization. Followers of political leaders on local dictatorship planets, companies of mercenaries thrown out of employment and living by pillage, religious fanatics following self-anointed prophets. You think we don't have plenty of neo-barbarian material here on Graham? Trask demanded. If you do, take a look around. Glaspeth, somebody said. That collection of overripe gallows fruit Andre Dunnan's recruited, Rathmar mentioned. Alex Gorham was grumbling that his shipyard was full of them, agitators stirring up trouble, trying to organize a strike to get rid of the robots. Yes, Harkiman pounced on that last. I know of at least 40 instances on 12.5 planets in the last 8 centuries of anti-technological movements. They had them on Terra back as far as the 2nd century pre-atomic, and after Venus seceded from the First Federation, before the Second Federation was organized. You're interested in history? Rathmore asked. A hobby. All spacemen have hobbies. There's very little work aboard ship in hyperspace. Boredom is the worst enemy. My guns and missiles officer, Van Larch, is a painter. Most of his work was lost with the Corsandi on Durendal, but he kept us from starving a few times on Flamberge by painting pictures and selling them. My hyperspatial astrogator, Guat Kirby, composes music. He tries to express the mathematics of hyperspatial theory in musical terms. I don't care much for it myself, he admitted. I study history. You know, it's odd. Practically everything that's happened on any of the inhabited planets happened on Terra before the first spaceship. The garden immediately around them was quiet now. Everybody was over by the landing stage escalators. Harkiman would have said more, but at that moment he saw half a dozen of Caesar Carvel's uniformed guardsmen run past. They were helmeted and in bulletproofs. One of them had an auto rifle, and the rest carried knobbed plastic truncheons. The space Viking set down his drink. Let's go, he said. Our host is calling up his troops. I think the guests ought to find battle stations, too. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The gaily dressed crowd formed a semicircle facing the landing stage escalators. Everybody was staring in embarrassed curiosity, those behind craning over the shoulders of those in front. The ladies had drawn up their shawls in frigid formality. Many had even covered their heads. There were 4 news service cars hovering above. Whatever was going on was getting a planet-wide screen showing. The Carvel guardsmen were trying to get through. Their sergeant was saying over and over, "Please, ladies and gentlemen, your pardon, noble sir," and getting nowhere. Otto Harkiman swore disgustedly and shoved the sergeant aside. "Make way there," he bellowed. "Let these guards pass." With that, he almost hurled a gaily dressed gentleman aside on either hand. They both turned to glare angrily, then got hastily out of his way. Meditating briefly on the uses of bad manners in an emergency, Trask followed with the others. The big space Viking plowed to the front, where Caesar Carvel and Rovard Grofus and several others were standing. Facing them, 4 men in black cloaks stood with their backs to the escalators. 2 were common folk retainers, hired gunmen to be precise. They were at pains to keep their hands plainly in sight and seemed to be wishing themselves elsewhere. The man in front wore a diamond sunburst jewel on his beret, and his cloak was lined with pale blue silk. His thin, pointed face was deeply lined about the mouth and penciled with a thin black mustache. His eyes showed white all around the irises, and now and then his mouth would twitch in an involuntary grimace. Andre Dunnan. Trask wondered briefly how soon he would have to look at him from 25 meters over the sights of a pistol. The face of the slightly taller man who stood at his shoulder was paper white, expressionless, with a black beard. His name was Neville Orme. Nobody was quite sure whence he had come, and he was Dunnan's henchman and constant companion. "You lie!" Dunnan was shouting. "You lie damnably in your stinking teeth, all of you. You've intercepted every message she's tried to send me." "My daughter has sent you no messages, Lord Dunnan," Caesar Carville said with forced patience. "None but the one I just gave you, that she wants nothing whatever to do with you."
You think I believe that? You're holding her prisoner. Satan only knows how you've been torturing her to force her into this abominable marriage.
There was a stir among the bystanders. That was more than well-mannered restraint could stand. Out of the murmur of incredulous voices, one woman's was quite audible. "Oh, really? He actually is crazy." Dunnan, like everybody else, heard it.
Crazy, am I? He blazed. Because I can see through this hypocritical sham? Here's Lucas Trask. He wants an interest in Carville Mills, and here's Caesar Carville. He wants access to iron deposits on Traskin land. And my loving uncle, he wants the help of both of them in stealing Humphrey of Glassmith's duchy. And here's this lone truck of a Fail trying to claw my hands away from me, and Rovard Groffus, the fetch dog of my uncle, who won't lift a finger to save his kinsman from ruin, and this foreigner, Harkiman, who swindled me out of command of the Enterprise. You're all plotting against me."
"Sir Neville," Groffus said, "you can see that Lord Dunnan's not himself. If you're a good friend to him, you'll get him out of here before Duke Angus arrives." Orm leaned forward and spoke urgently in Dunnan's ear. Dunnan pushed him angrily away.
"Great Satan, are you against me too?" he demanded.
Orm caught his arm. "You fool! Do you want to ruin everything now?" He lowered his voice. The rest was inaudible.
"No, curse you, I won't go till I've spoken to her, face to face."
There was another stir among the spectators. The crowd was parting, and Elaine was coming through, followed by her mother and Lady Sanderson and 5 or 6 other matrons. They all had their shawls over their heads, right ends over left shoulders. They all stopped except Elaine, who took a few steps forward and confronted Andre Dunnan. He had never seen her look more beautiful, but it was the icy beauty of a honed dagger. "Lord Dunnan, what do you wish to say to me?" she asked. "Say it quickly and then go. You are not welcome here."
"Elaine," Dunnan cried, taking a step forward, "why do you cover your head? Why do you speak to me as a stranger? I am Andre, who loves you. Why are you letting them force you into this wicked marriage?"
"No one is forcing me. I'm marrying Lord Trask willingly and happily, because I love him. Now please, go, and make no more trouble at my wedding."
"That's a lie. They're making you say that. You don't have to marry him. They can't make you. Come with me now. They won't dare stop you. I'll take you away from all these cruel, greedy people. You love me. You've always loved me. You've told me you love me again and again."
Yes, in his own private dream world, a world of fantasy that had now become Andre Dunnan's reality, in which an Elaine Carville whom his imagination had created existed only to love him. Confronted by the real Elaine, he simply rejected the reality. "I never loved you, Lord Dunnan, and I never told you so. I never hated you either, but you are making it very hard for me not to. Now go, and never let me see you again." With that, she turned and started back through the crowd, which parted in front of her. Her mother and her aunt and the other ladies followed.
"You lied to me," Dunnan shrieked after her. "You lied all the time. You're as bad as the rest of them, all scheming and plotting against me, betraying me. I know what it's about. You all want to cheat me of my rights and keep my usurping uncle on the ducal throne. And you false-hearted harlot, you're the worst of them all."
Sir Neville Orme caught his shoulder and spun him around, propelling him toward the escalators. Dunnan struggled, screaming inarticulately like a wounded wolf. Orme was cursing furiously. "You two," he shouted. "Help me here. Get a hold of him." Dunnan was still howling as they forced him onto the escalator. The backs of the 2 retainers' cloaks, badged with the Dunnan crescent, light blue on black, hiding him. After a little, an air car with the blue crescent blazonry lifted and sped away. Lucas, he's crazy, Caesar Carville was insisting. Elaine hasn't spoken 50 words to him since he came back from his last voyage. He laughed and put a hand on Carville's shoulder. I know that, Caesar. You don't think, do you, that I need assurance of it? Crazy, I'll say. He's crazy, Rovard Groffus put in. Did you hear what he said about his rights? Wait till his grace hears about that. Does he lay claim to the ducal throne, Sir Rovard? Otto Harkonnen asked, sharply and seriously. Oh, he claims that his mother was born a year and a half before Duke Angus, and the true date of her birth falsified to give Angus the succession. Why, his present grace was 3 years old when she was born. I was old Duke Fergus, Esquire. I carried Angus on my shoulder when Andre Dunnan's mother was presented to the lords and barons the day after she was born. Of course he's crazy, Alex Gorham agreed. I don't know why the Duke doesn't have him put under psychiatric treatment. I'd put him under treatment, Harkonnen said, drawing a finger across under his beard. Crazy men who pretend to thrones are bombs that ought to be deactivated before they blow things up. We couldn't do that, Groffus said. After all, he is Duke Angus' nephew. I could do it, Harkonnen said. He only has 300 men in this company of his. Why you people ever let him recruit them, Satan only knows, he parenthesized. I have 800. 500 ground fighters. I'd like to see how they shape up in combat before we space out. I can have them ready for action in 2 hours, and it'd be all over before midnight. No, Captain Harkonnen, his grace would never permit it, Groffus vetoed. You have no idea of the political harm that would do among the independent lords on whom we're counting for support. You weren't here on Graham when Duke Richard of Didriksburg had his sister Sansia's second husband poisoned. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. They halted under the colonnade. Beyond, the lower main terrace was crowded, and a medley of old love songs was wafting from the sound outlets for the 6th or 8th time around. He looked at his watch. It was 90 seconds later than the last time he had done so. Give it 15 more minutes to get started, and another 15 to get away after the marriage toasts and the felicitations. And no marriage, however pompous, lasted more than half an hour. An hour, then, till he and Elaine would be in the air car, bulleting toward Traskin. The love song stopped abruptly. After a momentary silence, a trumpet, considerably amplified, blared the ducal salute. The crowd stopped shifting. The buzz of voices ceased. At the head of the landing stage escalators there was a glow of color, and the ducal party began moving down. A platoon of guards in red and yellow, with gilded helmets and tasseled halberds, an esquire bearing the sword of state, Duke Angus, with his council, Otto Harkonnen among them, the Duchess Flavia and her companion ladies, the household gentlemen and their ladies, more guardsmen. There was a great burst of cheering. The news service air cars got into position above the procession. Cousin Nikolay and a few others stepped out from between the pillars into the sunlight. There was a similar movement at the other side of the terrace. The ducal party reached the end of the central walkway, halted, and deployed. All right, let's shove off, Cousin Nikolay said, stepping forward. 10 minutes since they had come outside. Another 5 to get into position. 50 minutes now till he and Elaine, Lady Elaine Trask of Traskin, for real and for always, would be going home. Sure the car's ready? He asked for the 100th time. His cousin assured him that it was. Figures in carvel black and flame yellow appeared across the terrace. The music began again, this time the stately Noble's Wedding March, arrogant and at the same time tender. Caesar Carville's gentleman secretary and the Carville lawyer, executives of the steel mills, the Carville guard captain, Caesar himself with Elaine on his arm. She was wearing a shawl of black and yellow. He looked around in sudden fright. For the love of Satan, where's our shawl? He demanded, and then relaxed when one of his gentlemen exhibited it, green and tawny in Traskin colors. The bridesmaids, led by Lady Lavinia Carville. Finally they halted, 10 yards apart, in front of the Duke. Who approaches us? Duke Angus asked of his guard captain. He had a thin, pointed face, almost femininely sensitive, and a small, pointed beard. He was bareheaded except for the narrow golden circlet which he spent most of his waking time scheming to convert into a royal crown. The guard captain repeated the question. I am Sir Nicolay Trask. I bring my cousin and liege lord Lucas, Lord Trask, Baron of Traskin. He comes to receive the Lady Demoiselle Elaine, daughter of Lord Caesar Carvel, Baron of Carvel Mills, and the sanction of your grace to the marriage between them. Sir Maximin Zorge, Caesar Carvel's henchman, named himself and his lord. They brought the Lady Demoiselle Elaine to be wed to Lord Trask of Traskin. The Duke, satisfied that these were persons whom he could address directly, asked if the terms of the marriage agreement had been reached. Both parties affirmed this. Sir Maximin paused and passed a scroll to the Duke. Duke Angus began to read the stiff and precise legal phraseology. Marriages between noble houses were not matters to be left open to dispute. A great deal of spilled blood and burned powder had resulted from ambiguity on some point of succession or inheritance, or dower rights. Lucas bore it patiently. He didn't want his great-grandchildren and Elaine's shooting it out over a matter of a misplaced comma. And these persons here before us do enter into this marriage freely? The Duke asked, when the reading had ended. He stepped forward as he spoke, and his esquire gave him the two-hand sword of state, heavy enough to behead a bisonoid. Trask stepped forward. Caesar Carvel brought Elaine up. The lawyers and henchmen obliqued off to the sides. How say you, Lord Trask? He asked almost conversationally. With all my heart, your grace. And you, Lady Demoiselle Elaine? It is my dearest wish, your grace. The Duke took the sword by the blade and extended it. They laid their hands on the jeweled pommel. And do you and your houses avow us, Angus, Duke of Wardshaven, to be your sovereign prince, and pledge fealty to us and to our legitimate and lawful successors? We do. Not only he and Elaine, but all around them, and all the throng in the gardens, answered the spectators in shouts. Very clearly above it all, somebody with more enthusiasm than discretion was bawling, Long live Angus the First of Graham! And we, Angus, do confer upon you two and your houses the right to wear our badge as you see fit, and pledge ourselves to maintain your rights against any and all who may presume to invade them. And we declare that this marriage between you two, and this agreement between your respective houses, does please us, and we avow you two, Lucas and Elaine, to be lawfully wed, and whoso questions this marriage challenges us, in our teeth, and to our despite. It wasn't exactly the wording used by a ducal lord on Graham. It was the formula employed by a planetary king, like Napoleon of Flamberge or Rodolphe of Excalibur. And now that he thought of it, Angus had consistently used the royal first-person plural. Maybe that fellow who had shouted about Angus the First of Graham had only been doing what he'd been paid to do. This was being telecast, and Omfrey of Glaspeth and Richard of Didriksburg would both be listening. As of now, they'd start hiring mercenaries. Maybe that would get rid of Dunnan for him. The Duke gave the two-hand sword back to his esquire. The young knight who was carrying the green and tawny shawl handed it to him, and Elaine dropped the black and yellow one from her shoulders, the only time a respectable woman ever did that in public, and her mother caught and folded it. He stepped forward and draped the Trask colors over her shoulders, and then took her in his arms. The cheering broke out again, and some of Caesar Carvel's guardsmen began firing a pom-pom somewhere. It took a little longer than he had expected to finish with the toasts and shake hands with those who crowded around. Finally, the exit march started, down the long walkway to the landing stage, and the Duke and his party moved away to the rear to prepare for the wedding feast, at which everybody but the bride and groom would celebrate. One of the bridesmaids gave Elaine a huge sheaf of flowers, which she was to toss back from the escalator. She held it on the crook of one arm and clung to his with the other. Darling, we really made it, she was whispering, as though it were too wonderful to believe. Well, wasn't it? One of the news cars, orange and blue, that was Westland's telecast and teleprint, had floated just ahead of them and was letting down toward the landing stage. For a moment he was angry. That went beyond the outer orbit limits of journalistic propriety, even for Westland's TNT. Then he laughed. Today he was too happy for anger about anything. At the foot of the escalator, Elaine kicked off her gilded slippers. There was another pair in the car. He'd seen to that personally. And they stepped onto the escalator and turned about. The bridesmaids rushed forward and began struggling for the slippers, to the damage and disarray of their gowns, and when they were halfway up, Elaine heaved the bouquet, and it burst apart among them like a bomb of colored fragrance, and the girls below snatched at the flowers, shrieking deliriously. Elaine stood, blowing kisses to everybody, and he was shaking his clasped hands over his head until they were at the top. When they turned and stepped off, the orange and blue aircar had let down directly in front of them, blocking their way. Now he was really furious and started forward with a curse. Then he saw who was in the car. Andre Dunnan, his thin face contorted and the narrow mustache writhing on his upper lip. He had a slit beside the window open and was tilting the barrel of a submachine gun up and out of it. He shouted, and at the same time tripped Elaine and flung her down. He was throwing himself forward to cover her when there was a blasting multiple report. Something sledged him in the chest. His right leg crumpled under him. He fell. He fell and fell and fell endlessly through darkness, out of consciousness. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. He was crucified and crowned with a crown of thorns. Who had they done that to? Somebody long ago on Terra. His arms were drawn out stiffly and hurt. His feet and legs hurt too, and he couldn't move them. And there was this prickling at his brow. He was blind. No, his eyes were just closed. He opened them, and there was a white wall in front of him, patterned with a blue snow crystal design. And he realized that it was a ceiling and that he was lying on his back. He couldn't move his head, but by shifting his eyes he saw that he was completely naked and surrounded by a tangle of tubes and wires, which puzzled him briefly. Then he knew that he was not on a bed, but on a robomedic, and the tubes would be for medication, wound drainage, and intravenous feeding, and the wires would be to electrodes embedded in his body for diagnosis. And the crown of thorns thing would be more electrodes for an encephalograph. He'd been on one of those robomedics before, when he had been gored by a bisonoid on the cattle range. That was what it was. He was still under treatment. But that seemed so long ago. So many things, he must have dreamed them, seemed to have happened. Then he remembered and struggled futilely to rise. "Elaine!" he called. "Elaine, where are you?" There was a stir, and somebody came into his limited view, his cousin, Lucas Trask. "Nikolai, Andre Dunnan," he said. "What happened to Elaine?" Nikolai winced, as though something he had expected to hurt had hurt worse than he had expected. "Lucas," he swallowed. Elaine is dead." "Elaine is dead? That didn't make any sense." "She was killed instantly, Lucas. Hit 6 times. I don't think she even felt the first one. She didn't suffer at all." Somebody moaned, and then he realized that it had been himself. "You were hit twice," Nikolai was telling him. "One on the leg, smashed the femur, and one on the chest. That one missed your heart by an inch." "Pity it did." He was beginning to remember clearly now. "I threw her down and tried to cover her. I must have thrown her straight into the burst and only caught the last of it myself. There was something else. Oh, yes. Dunnan. Did they get him?" Nikolai shook his head. "He got away. Stole the Enterprise and took her off planet. I want to get him myself." He started to rise again. Nikolai nodded to someone out of sight. A cool hand touched his chin, and he smelled a woman's perfume. Nothing at all like Elaine's. Something like a small insect bit him on the neck. The room grew dark. Elaine was dead. There was no more Elaine, nowhere at all. Why, that must mean there was no more world. So that was why it had gotten so dark. He woke again, fitfully, and it would be daylight, and he could see the yellow sky through an open window, or it would be night, and the wall lights would be on. There would always be somebody with him. Nicolae's wife, Dame Cecilia, Rovard Grofus, Lady Lavina Carvel. He must have slept a long time, for she was so much older than he remembered. And her brother, Bert Sanderson, and a woman with dark hair and a white smock with a gold caduceus on her breast. Once Duchess Flavia, and once Duke Angus himself. He asked where he was, not much caring. They told him at the ducal palace. He wished they'd all go away and let him go wherever Elaine was. Then it would be dark, and he would be trying to find her, because there was something he wanted desperately to show her. Stars in the sky at night. That was it. But there were no stars. There was no Elaine. There was no anything, and he wished that there was no Lucas Trask either. But there was an Andre Dunnan. He could see him standing, black-cloaked on the terrace, the diamond in his beret jewel glittering evilly. He could see the mad face peering at him over the rising barrel of the submachine gun, and then he would hunt for him without finding him through the cold darkness of space. The waking periods grew longer, and during them his mind was clear. They relieved him of his crown of electronic thorns. The feeding tubes came out, and they gave him cups of broth and fruit juice. He wanted to know why he had been brought to the palace. About the only thing we could do, Rovard Grofus told him. They had too much trouble at Carvel House as it was. You know, Caesar got shot too. No. So that was why Caesar hadn't come to see him. Was he killed? Wounded. He's in worse shape than you are. When the shooting started, he went charging up the escalator, didn't have anything but his dress dagger. Dunnan gave him a quick burst. I think that was why he didn't have time to finish you off. By that time, the guards who'd been shooting blanks from that rapid-fire gun got in a clip of live rounds and fired at him. He got out of there as fast as he could. They have Caesar on a robomedic like yours. He isn't in any danger. The drainage tubes and medication tubes came out. The tangle of wires around him was removed, and the electrodes with them. They bandaged his wounds and dressed him in a loose robe and lifted him from the robomedic to a couch, where he could sit up when he wished. They began giving him solid food and wine to drink, and allowed him to smoke. The woman doctor told him he'd had a bad time, as though he didn't know that. He wondered if she expected him to thank her for keeping him alive. You'll be up and around in a few weeks, his cousin added. I've seen to it that everything at Trask and Newhouse will be ready for you by then. I'll never enter that house as long as I live, and I wish that wouldn't be more than the next minute. That was to be Elaine's house. I won't go to it alone. The dreams troubled his sleep less and less as he grew stronger. Visitors came often, bringing amusing little gifts, and he found that he enjoyed their company. He wanted to know what had really happened and how Dunnan had gotten away. He pirated the Enterprise, Rovard Grofus told him. He had that company of mercenaries of his, and he'd bribed some of the people at the Gorham's shipyards. I thought Alex would kill his chief of security when he found out what had happened. We can't prove anything, we're trying hard enough to, but we're sure Humphrey of Glaspeth furnished the money. He's been denying it just a shade too emphatically. Then the whole thing was planned in advance. Taking the ship was. He must have been planning that for months, before he started recruiting that company. I think he meant to do it the night before the wedding. Then he tried to persuade the Lady Demoiselle Elaine to elope with him. He seems to have actually thought that was possible, and when she humiliated him, he decided to kill both of you first. He turned to Otto Harkonnen, who had accompanied him. As long as I live, I'll regret not taking you at your word and accepting your offer then. How did he get hold of that Westland's telecast and teleprint car? Oh, the morning of the wedding, he screened Westland's editorial office and told them he had the inside story on the marriage and why the Duke was sponsoring it. Made it sound as though there was some scandal. Insisted that a reporter come to Dunnan House for a face-to-face interview. They sent a man, and that was the last they saw him alive. Our people found his body at Dunnan House when we were searching the place afterward. We found the car at the shipyard. It had taken a couple of hits from the guns at Carvel House, but you know what these press cars are built to stand. He went directly to the shipyard, where his men already had the Enterprise. As soon as he arrived, she lifted out. He stared at the cigarette between his fingers. It was almost short enough to burn him. With an effort, he leaned forward to crush it out. "Rovard, how soon will that second ship be finished?" Groffuss laughed bitterly. "Building the Enterprise took everything we had. The duchy's on the edge of bankruptcy now. We stopped work on the second ship 6 months ago because we didn't have enough money to keep on with her and still get the Enterprise finished. We were expecting the Enterprise to make enough in the old Federation to finish the second one. Then, with 2 ships and a base on Tanith, the money would begin to come in instead of going out. But now... It leaves me where I was on Flamberge," Harkonnen added. "Worse, King Napoleon was going to help the Elmisons, and I'd have gotten a command in that, too. It's too late for that now." He picked up his cane and used it to push himself to his feet. The broken leg had mended, but he was still weak. He took a few tottering steps, paused to lean on the cane, and then forced himself on to the open window and stood for a moment staring out. Then he turned. "Captain Harkonnen, it might be that you could still get a command here on Graham. That's if you don't mind commanding under me as owner aboard. I'm going hunting for Andre Dunnan." They both looked at him. After a moment, Harkonnen said, "I'd count it an honor, Lord Trask. But where will you get a ship?" "She's half finished now. You already have a crew for her. Duke Angus can finish her for me and pay for it by pledging his new barony of Traskin." He had known Rovard Groffuss all his life. Until this moment he had never seen Duke Angus' henchmen show surprise. "You mean you'll trade Traskin for that ship?" he demanded. "Finished, equipped, and ready for space, yes." "The Duke will agree to that," Groffuss said promptly. "But Lucas, Traskin is all you own." "If I have a ship, I won't need them. I'm turning space Viking." That brought Harkonnen to his feet with a roar of approval. Groffuss looked at him, his mouth slightly open. "Lucas Trask, space Viking," he said. "Now I've heard everything." Well, why not? He had deplored the effects of Viking raiding on the Sword World because Graham was a Sword World, and Traskin was on Graham, and Traskin was to have been the home where he and Elaine would live, and where their children and children's children would be born and live. Now the little point on which all of it had rested was gone. That was another Lucas Trask, Rovard. He's dead now. End of chapter 5.